Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're so glad to have you on today. I'm here with Katie, and we are just going to be answering some questions. So, to start us off, I'll introduce myself and then give Katie the chance to share what it is she's up to. But my name's Tia. I've had OCD my whole life, so kind of just symptoms starting when I was 3 years old and jumping between a lot of the different themes over my lifetime. The main five themes I had was scrupulosity, existential, perfectionism, harm, and relationship. Those were kind of the ones my OCD really focused on. And then I was diagnosed and treated 2 years ago. And ever since then, I've just been doing a lot of advocacy work and managing life and recovery. I run some of the different support groups we have here at NoCD, and then just do a lot of advocacy over on Instagram. I'm at Tortilla Wilson over there. So that's a little bit about who I am. And I'd love, Katie, if you want to introduce yourself and tell everyone what you've been up to.
Yeah, I'm super excited. This is my first time on an OCD stream, so I'm excited to be here with y'all today. Very similar to Tia, I have had symptoms of OCD since really before I can remember as a kid, and grew up and went through all different sorts of themes. For me, there was a lot related to checking growing up, and then shifting later into specifically a lot of harm related themes and false memory related themes into really adulthood. And the interesting thing with me, I'm really passionate about the intersection between religion and faith. I'm an interfaith school chaplain, and I'm doing my doctorate right now at the intersection of faith and mental health, looking at OCD and different faith traditions and trying to make that exposure and response prevention accessible in diverse faith traditions. But I'm also doing a lot with NoCD right now around ultra marathon running. So currently tackling 50 ultra marathons in 50 states for individuals seeking treatment from NoCD, which sounded like a really great idea when I was putting it together. And now I'm like, okay, I have one done and 49 to go. So that's
Oh
seems
my
like
goodness.
bananas, but really excited to be doing that with NoCD, and definitely check out my Instagram if that's something that y'all would like to contribute to, so we can pay for one person in each state seeking treatment. You don't have to do any of the running. I will do that, and we can go on still the journey together.
I love that. I cannot even imagine running one. And so I think it's incredible that you're so committed to this. I think it's so cool.
Thank you. I love anyway. I love ultras and I love that kind of stuff. This was a particularly tough race this weekend, so I finished and was like, "Huh, okay, 49 more. That's great." But
Oh my
yeah,
goodness. Which state did you run in this last weekend?
I just did North Carolina this weekend,
Okay.
and yeah, there's all kinds of stuff on my Instagram about it because it was a tough particular day with all sorts of issues, much like OCD, where I had to give myself a lot of compassion and decide to keep going, maybe with some different goals in mind. And then finally came through after 33 miles of struggle and got stung in the face by a bee. So again, like OCD, continuing to kind of
Oh
come
my
up,
goodness.
but it was still a good and a value driven day. So yeah.
Oh my goodness. Oh, that's insane. Okay, and I love that you kind of talk about the intersection between faith and OCD. I didn't realize that's a commonality we have. That's also something I love to focus on, is that the way we can try to be value centered, and religion is all about values, right? But OCD can just grab right onto those religious rules, right? And it can be hard to separate those genuine values from our religious standing. And so I think that's so cool that you talk about that as well. I think that's awesome.
It's really important, and we're getting ready to. I do a lot with the IOCDF as an advocate, and we're getting ready to come out with like a whole new resource page around faith and OCD. And I'm super passionate about bringing those things together, because they don't have to be mutually exclusive, and faith leaders
Right.
and clinicians like can work together, and that can be very much a thing. I'm a faith leader who has OCD, and that's a reality.
Yeah. No, I love that. That's incredible. Okay, well, we'll dive into some of these questions. I can already see a couple of them. Let's see. Okay. So this is a really good question. They said, "Hi, I've been doing ERP for a couple days and it's very hard. Is it a compulsion to research about your fear if it may be an exposure, afraid of mental illness and wondering if I should cut out Googling?" That I think is a really, really good question. Do you have any thoughts with that, Katie?
Yeah, I mean, so a couple different things. I know that I definitely had that experience of wanting to Google with every single aspect of my fear to make sure that it was actually OCD, to make sure that it was okay. And I think both and so I think actually doing, if you're looking at some research around what OCD is, about how to do exposures, if you're doing that at the beginning kind of once or twice maybe before you're seeking treatment, that's perfectly fine. But if you're finding yourself continuing to research that fear over and over again to make sure it's actually OCD, or to make sure everything is okay with it, for me it was always to make sure I'm not a bad person, to make sure that it really is what I feel like it is. That does become really compulsive, and can be really challenging, and maybe something that you should work to try to pull back on. What about you, Tia?
No, I love that. I mean, you kind of said it. It's all about the intention, right? There's sometimes where you might be researching and the intention is just to get more knowledge, right? And there are other times where the intention is to get rid of your distress. And so I think a really, really good way to tell whether it's you're researching out of an OCD compulsion or just out of that wanting to know more information is to try the walk away. Try to walk away from it and see, how do you feel? Does your distress go way up and you feel this urgency like, no, I need to go research it right now? That's usually a good indication that this has become compulsive, right? But if you're able to walk away and it's just like, oh, I really wish I could have, I would have learned something. I was looking forward to that, and it's not so distressing or so urgent, then it might be something that's good to engage with, and you can go back to it and see if you can, Google that one thing and not use it as a compulsion. But I think, yeah, kind of like you said, it's all about the intention that's there and what it is you're seeking when you do that.
And I think OCD can kind of trick you with it too. I know I've had experiences where I kind of tell myself, well, I'm actually doing an exposure by Googling this because it stresses me out.
Right.
Maybe I'm helping myself. And I think really, as Tia said, figuring out that intention. And some of you might be familiar with Wise Mind, trusting Wise Mind. And is it really an exposure that you're doing? Is it really research you're doing? Or is it a compulsion? And kind of really following through with that.
Exactly. And it can be different. You could Google the exact same thing one time and have it not be a compulsion, and the next time it could be, right? Like your intention might shift. And so, yeah, I love what you just said about using Wise Mind. Is this actually an exposure, or maybe is it looking for more certainty about what that threat is, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that's really great. Let's see if we got some others. Are there any that are standing out to you as you're reading through? I know there's a lot, so I want to make sure we get to the
Yeah.
ones we can.
I see at 7:58, I have harm OCD and suicidal OCD, and it makes me scared of what's going to happen because they make me believe I might hurt someone or might hurt myself, and that scares me. Any advice? And that stands out to me because those are big themes that I've dealt with, particularly around harm OCD. And I'll be honest, for the longest time, I was really fearful. What if I'm a school chaplain? It was, what if I'm harmful to my students? What if I could do something horrible?
Right.
And some of you that recently heard my talk at the conference, I actually ended up losing, really sadly, someone in my life to suicide a few years ago, and then blamed myself for that loss. And it was very much, well, what if I actually was responsible? What if I forgot about it and did something horrible? And I think this comes up for so many of us, and it can feel really, really isolating, these harm pieces, because OCD is latching on to the things that are literally the most significant and the most important to you. For me, it's always been my students. It's both been students that are in my life, students that have previously been in my life. And yeah, OCD is really convincing, makes you feel like you could have hurt someone, like you could hurt someone in the future, like something horrible could happen. But the biggest advice that I would give is to make sure that you're seeking treatment, that you're doing exposure and response prevention, and as irresponsible as it might seem at that moment, to live into that uncertainty. Because really, what ends up happening, if you're trying to protect the people around you, if you're trying to protect yourself, if you're not living into that uncertainty, it ends up kind of becoming this process where you end up giving up your life, you end up giving up those around you by trying to protect them, when in reality, it's doing all of the things that you're doing to try to protect those around you. It really isn't. It's living into that uncertainty gives you that opportunity to actually spend time with those in your life and to have a life. So doing those exposures, as irresponsible as they might seem, are so, so, so important. What do you think, Tia?
No, I'm right there with you. That was also, one of my big themes. It got to the point where I was like, I can't leave my apartment because, I might go out and someone might be having a bad day and I might not help them. And then I'd be responsible if they, were to go home and hurt themselves or something. Like I felt so much responsibility. So I stopped going out. Just like you said, I stopped actually doing having those connections that I valued so much because I was so scared of losing them. And same with the suicidal OCD. I found myself avoiding being alone or avoiding um, just so many scenarios where I felt like I might feel any emotion because I was so scared it would lead to suicide, right? And so I think that those again are some of the hard ones to sit with because like you said, OCD loves to grab onto what you care about and it's so often people. For so many of our themes there's this element of people, right? And so there it's hard to do the exposures, but it's so worth it. I mean, sometimes an exposure might even be like for me, I had to listen to sad playlists,
Mhm.
and that was an exposure because it was putting me in my emotions and letting me practice sitting with them. And in my brain, I thought, oh no, this might lead to harm or to me feeling really negatively for a long period of time. And so it could be small exposures like that. It could be exposures where you're just going out and walking outside, right? But those exposures, while they're hard, are so worth it. And yeah, I have, like you said, it can be really isolating. It can be really hard, because those thoughts, those intrusive thoughts, can feel almost visceral, right? They're things we care about, and so it's so hard to have these intrusive thoughts play out. But you're not alone in having those thoughts. A whole lot of us in the community do, and the more we can, practice sitting with the uncertainty, like you said, living in that uncertainty without having to neutralize our distress away, or have to, do any sort of compulsions that try to keep other people safe, the more we're able to live that values consistent life, the easier it is to sit through those thoughts. And so, yeah, I love everything you said there about the living into that uncertainty. It's so much better, even though it feels so much scarier, right?
Oh, it's terrifying, and like you said, it is. It's everything that's important to us. It feels so real in the moment, and I'll tell that the person who asked this question. I was at the point, even with some harm stuff and false memories, where I would come home from being a school chaplain all day and sit and stare at my cell phone and consider calling the police on myself for crimes I didn't commit because it felt so freaking real. Like that's just it does. It feels real, but the really big flip point for me was realizing, you know what, I am willing to accept the uncertainty. I am willing to risk all of the scary things being true for a chance at the life that I want, for a chance at the life I deserve, and for a chance with those that I care about. And really hanging on to that value piece, I think makes such a big difference.
Yeah, I love that. We have a support group where it's all about identifying those values because I think that that's the why. ERP is the how, that's how we get through things, but the values are the why. We want to get back to those relationships and not, be holed off in our apartments or isolating. One instance I can think of where it felt like OCD was protecting me from harm, but it actually was putting me in harmful situations was I remember I live in Utah, so there's really icy roads, and there's one night I slid off the road just like crazy ice. And I went back with ice and a shovel, or with salt and a shovel, and I was trying to shovel the road because I felt like if anyone else slipped off,
No.
it would be my fault, right? And so I had this big compulsion where for hours I was out there chipping at the ice, and it was super unsafe conditions. Two cars almost hit me, right? But I was like, felt like if I didn't do it, I would be responsible. And I think that's a really good example of the way OCD sometimes makes us feel like we are being safer by engaging with our compulsions, right? It felt so unsafe to sit with the idea that I might, because I don't scrape off the road, someone else might slip off, right? But instead, I was putting myself in a situation where I very well could have gotten very hurt, right? And I also couldn't really scrape off all the ice on the road. It didn't really make a lot of logical sense, but OCD doesn't care, right? It feels so real in the moment. And so when we're able to teach ourselves that we can sit with the distress, and like you said, even if those worst case scenarios are true, even if someone else slid off the road and it was somehow my fault, that's still something like I could learn to sit with instead of trying to push it away. And because I learned to sit with those things, then you can go back to that values consistent life, right? Where I'm not up at 1 in the morning scraping ice off the roads, but instead I'm like home sleeping or with my family. Yeah.
Because OCD, it becomes like this self fulfilling prophecy. Everything that you're afraid of when you try to fix it, it's like it actually happens. Oh, you're afraid of losing your family or losing your loved ones, and you try to prevent that. OCD pushes them away.
Right.
Like you with the road, you ended up being in more danger by going back and doing that. And it's so not funny, but just awful and bizarre and twisted how it flips everything. That's important.
Definitely. No, definitely. I think that looks like this other comment kind of ties right into that. It's at 6:04. She said, how would you describe OCD to your significant other? I'm realizing there's a link between rough patches in our relationship and my OCD. When my OCD flares up, things get bad for a bit. And yeah, that's kind of what we were just discussing, the way that sometimes OCD can get in the way of those relationships that we value. And sometimes even, grab onto those relationships and tell us because we care so much, we have to live a certain way, which inevitably ends up, you know, driving more wedges. And so, yeah, how would you describe OCD to a significant other?
I feel very fortunate. My significant other actually has OCD, so and that's been very very helpful in how we navigate. And there can be pluses and minuses. I noted that too, because we both go through different spells together. But I think in describing maybe to my family and how I advise describing to a significant other is I always say it's kind of like a bear standing in front of your face, or the most scary possible thing you can think of in front of you all the time, continuing to be there. And the more you try to push it away, the bigger and the bigger and the bigger it gets. And I think it's really important to explain that to your family or to your significant other. But I also think it's just as important to let them know, as scared as I get, that reassuring me that offering accommodations are not necessarily going to help. It's just going to continue to make that bear. It's going to continue to make that OCD bigger and bigger and bigger. So letting them know when I'm in those situations that you can offer me all sorts of love and compassion, but without offering me that reassurance. I also think, because I know you're noting the rough past patches in your relationship and OCD, that sometimes it can be really helpful, if they're willing to have a significant other even sit in with you during therapy to be able to talk through some things together and talk through specific tools, that they might be able to use as you're navigating OCD, but also ways that you might be able to work together in that process.
I love that. I actually use a similar analogy with a bear. And I love what you said about, the way you have a partner who has OCD and the way that sometimes works and sometimes doesn't. I've had even just friendships where it's worked because we both had OCD and times where it didn't. And I think one of the biggest indications is when both of you are working on it, right? Because otherwise you can breed a lot of resentment when it's like one's not working on it and the other one is. So I love that you guys are able to have that relationship where you're both working on it and talking about it. I think, yeah, the analogy of the bear I like to use is just the idea that, you know, whenever way back in the day, the first caveman sees a bear and he's like, "Oh my goodness, that's so cute and fluffy. That's awesome." And then he sees his friend get eaten by a bear and he's like, "Okay, bears are scary." So then his brain, the next time he sees a bear, he doesn't even have to think, he just runs, right? His brain has learned bears are scary, so we run away. Bears are scary, so we run away, and it keeps doing that cycle until he gets so quick at running away from bears, it's like not even a thought, right? He just sees one out of the corner of his eye and he's already running, right?
Mhm.
And with OCD, that's a really great alarm model, right? We need those alarms in our lives. Like that caveman, it saved his life probably a number of times to run away from bears. But with OCD, sometimes it's a false alarm. Maybe it's a butterfly. But our brain still learns that same cycle, which is okay, I'm scared. I run away, which means that was something I should have been scared of. And so I run away, which means that was something I should have been scared of. Like it kind of reconfirms to our brains this is a genuine threat. And so with OCD treatment, what we're trying to do is stop running away so that our brains can learn, okay, maybe this is a false alarm because I'm not running, so maybe it's not as serious, right? And so I think using that example has been helpful in describing OCD to my loved ones, helping them understand that this is, it's a false alarm, but it feels like a real alarm. It feels just as scary as if it was a bear, even if it's a butterfly, even if I logically understand butterflies can't hurt me, it feels just as scary as if it was a bear. And so I love what you said about teaching loved ones what reassurance looks like and the way that it's not going to help you in the long run because it's just teaching you that running away works, right? And so if they can just instead encourage you to sit with it and keep validating your emotions and the struggle you're going through, but not try to decrease your distress, right? Just encourage you to sit with it. I think that that can be so powerful. And I've had a lot of relationships where I was, maybe worried to bring it up, but instead it was able to bring us closer because one thing that I think people don't give themselves enough credit for with OCD is the fact that you're aware of it. You're fighting back, right? There's so many people who might go through life and never take a look at their internal processes or why their brain works the way it does. But, just by being here, just by listening to this, you're learning more about your brains and working on ways to fight it. And so when you're able to look back like Elizabeth's talking about and see those rough patches, I hope you're able to have self-compassion and
Mhm.
understand that your brain is going through a lot. Your brain is seeing bears all the time. Like, of course you're having a hard time. And then just, honor the journey you're on toward recovery where you're here, you're showing up, and it might be a process. It's hard, right? But I think that there's a whole lot of power in just the fact that you're showing up for yourself because that's something not everyone wants to do. Not everyone wakes up and is like, let's fight all my demons, right? Let's fight all the bears in my life. So I just want to say it's incredible that you guys are here. And sometimes people feel like they're not worthy of relationships because of the OCD, but I think just the fact that you're showing up for yourself is
Mhm.
evidence that you're someone who would be a good person to be in a relationship with, right?
Mhm. Or worthy of healthy relationships, and I know I've been
Right.
there too, and others with OCD end up in that situation a lot. I've been in some really unhealthy relationships where it was like because of my OCD, I didn't value myself and let other people maybe not treat me very nicely or other people value me. And I think that can happen too, where it's so, so, so important to recognize, you know what, yeah, you have OCD, but you're here and you're working on it and you're this awesome, amazing individual and you deserve to treat yourself with kindness, but you also deserve that person that you're in a relationship with to treat you with kindness and love and respect as you go through your journey. Ironically, my partner's texting me. He's like, "Who's your partner? Who's your partner?" So my partner is advocate Ethan Smith, who some folks know, and the interesting thing is we definitely try to hold each other accountable as we move through our OCD journeys. We often tell each other if one of us is compulsing, we'll say we use ERP as a verb. We'll say, "Hey, you need to go in the other room and ERP." Um,
I love that. Oh, that's so fun.
ERP, just go ERP it. But we've kind of worked, and not that it's perfect, but really tried to work on the balance between how can we offer one another compassion, but also hold one another accountable when we are struggling, and how can we talk to the OCD in those moments and really not encourage it.
That's beautiful. I love that. I love using "erp" as a verb. I think I might have to start doing that.
Say it all the time. ERP it.
That's so fun. And I think too, even if your partner doesn't have OCD, that's still something that they might be able to relate to. Everyone can relate to
Mhm.
feeling distress or anxiety or fear or disgust or anger, any of those emotions that can come with OCD. And so I found, even when my partner doesn't have OCD, they might still really like the idea of exposures, and that can still be something they can practice and they can push themselves out of their comfort zone. So you can kind of like help them understand what it is you're facing by encouraging them to do their own ERP for whatever their fears are in life. Even if they aren't, OCD's illogical fears, there's still ERP that pretty much anyone can do. I think everyone could benefit from some exposure response prevention therapy, right?
Oh, wait, totally. Because everybody loves certainty. Everybody really
Yeah.
loves to have this neat time, and that's one of the things that's been really interesting as an educator with through COVID is I've been able to hear for the first time a lot of other folks talking about, okay, in education we just need to live into the uncertainty, and I've kind of felt
Mm.
like, woof, we've been doing this for years, right? We've been having these conversations. We're ready for this.
Yeah, no, I love that. This new comment just said, "How do you distinguish between OCD and overthinking?" And I think that this ties right in, or maybe you don't need to, right? You can still approach it with the same ERP, the same uncertainty, whether it's OCD or overthinking. I think that most people, like you said, most people like certainty and try to find it. And so sometimes it doesn't matter whether it's coming from an OCD place or just from a place of wanting certainty otherwise. You can still approach it the same way you would as if it was OCD, right? And instead of trying to let navigating whether or not it's OCD become a compulsion, you can just face it with the ERP.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, if it looks like OCD and smells like OCD, just treat it like OCD and see
Yeah,
kind of what happens.
I love
I love
that.
also at 8:15, which I think is 6:15 for you, which I'm realizing is why our times are I'm like,
Oh,
"Oh." Yeah.
yeah.
So at my 8:15, I really relate to this. It says, started ERP for false memory, and it's so difficult at times to have self compassion, especially when the doubt and anxiety are high. Even when it's calm, I have the anger, fear, and doubt. Any advice? And false memory. Kind of pieces for me were some of the most challenging, where I would check something for so long. It would always kind of start with a little what if of, well, what if I did that one thing that was wrong? And the more that I checked it, the more I tried to bring it into awareness in my mind, the more I tried to see it to make sure I didn't do anything wrong, the more it would just become this full blown memory that wasn't a memory, just this intrusive thought about the past. The thing that I struggled with is exactly what you're talking about. It's how could I possibly have self compassion when I'm being told in my treatment to live into the uncertainty that I could have done something horrible or something completely against my morals? And my therapist used to tell me that I still, one, deserve self compassion, but two, that if I lived into that uncertainty, that at some point it really just wouldn't matter anymore. I wouldn't be asking those questions anymore. And I really didn't believe her. I said, how could I get to that point where I don't care if I committed these horrible acts? And she said, well, you just have to try to accept that uncertainty. The more that you do it, the more that you tell yourself you still love yourself regardless, you'll be able to move past that. And she was absolutely right. I think a big turning of a corner for me was realizing that I really could love myself, that I could have compassion for myself, regardless of whether or not all of the scary stuff was true. And when I finally was able to live into that, it really didn't matter anymore. But I was also really able to kind of see the truth of the things that were real and the things that maybe weren't real. But it also took taking that leap. It took being able to say, I'm willing for all of this to be true because I want this amazing life that I desire. And what I will tell you is, I know it is so hard. And I used to roll my eyes every time somebody told me I deserve self compassion when I was navigating false memory type stuff. But I really will say, Sarah, you do deserve compassion. And the fact that you're here and you're sharing that is so big and so huge. And I'll tell you, the reason your OCD is latching onto that is because it's so important to you and because you're such an awesome person. So you deserve all of that self compassion. You deserve to live into that uncertainty so that you can get better, both for yourself and for those around you. I don't know if you have any other false memory thoughts, Tia.
No, I absolutely love everything you just said. I think that it's interesting because in the world, we learn a lot of the time that our worth is external, right? We learn, okay, you do well in school, like good job, that's how you earn your worth. You do well at this outside activity, that's how you earn your worth. And I think the OCD loves to grab onto that and place a lot of our deservement or whether or not we deserve love based on our external actions, right? And with false memory, it can be based on those things that happened in the past. I remember I've had really severe health issues since I was like 13, and a lot of it I think was came because of my OCD and just kind of grabbing onto external things to the point where I got really sick from the chronic stress, right? And I remember expressing to a friend like I think I might have caused my health problems and I feel so guilty and I don't want to I can't even hardly say that out loud. I feel so guilty. What if I caused this? And I remember that friend kind of said, "Okay, well, if you did, does that make you less deserving of love right now?" And it just kind of struck me because in my brain I felt like it did, right? And so I think it's hard and like you said it's easier said than done, but it's this practice more than it's some final destination. Like you don't wake up and just are like, okay, I love myself, right? Instead it's this constant daily practice. Even when you feel like you don't deserve love,
Mhm,
it's still showing up to therapy, it's still trying to get some sleep, it's still eating in the morning. It's all those different little teeny acts of love, the same way you would love on a toddler, right? Making sure your needs are met even when you feel like you don't deserve them. And after a while, your brain catches up because it's not external, right? It doesn't,
mhm,
whether or not I cause this health problem does not determine how much I'm suffering now or whether or not I'm deserving love now, right?
mhm,
And so I think that, yeah, I love everything you just said. If you guys are wanting to practice more self-compassion too, we have a support group here at NoCD too that's about self-care and self-compassion and just kind of sharing everyone's journeys because it's hard, right? It's this daily process, and it can feel really overwhelming at first. But like I love what Katie what you said about the way it's just you just deserve it, just because you
mhm.
exist and are a human being, you deserve love, right?
And we're so good at giving it to other people too. We really are. And I think so many folks with OCD are just the most amazing, compassionate, creative, awesome people. And I watch so many folks in the OCD community do everything under the sun for those around them and then turn around and just talk to themselves in an absolutely horrible way. And I'm saying that because I do it. But I was leading a support group earlier today, and it was interesting. I was watching someone say so many nice things to everybody around them. And I said, well, what does it look like if you say that to yourself? And they were like, oh no, I don't deserve it. I can't say that. And it's something that we really struggle with. And I said, can you name one thing that you really like about yourself? They were able to name one thing that was important to them, that they saw in themselves that they liked. And I saw a total change in their body when they did that. They put their shoulders back and they were like, you know what? I'm really good at this one thing. And I would encourage anybody who's starting on that self compassion journey, just like Tia said, it's one step at a time. It's not all of a sudden, bam, you're there. But even starting really small and saying, you know what, I really am good at this. And I like myself for that. Saying that one thing, even if that's just in this moment, is a step.
I love that. Yeah, it's all about those little steps. Someone in a support group recently called them kitten steps because she's like, I don't
Oh,
really like baby steps, but I like kitten steps. It feels a little bit more approachable. And so I thought that was kind of fun. So it's
I love
kitten
that. I have
steps
a
towards
giant
self love.
cat tree sitting behind me. So I'm
Oh,
all
I
about
love it. That's
it.
so fun. Yeah, what Jill said, OCD doesn't define any one of us. I think it's so helpful to like kind of externalize your experience, see what other people are experiencing when they go through OCD, understand what OCD looks like, and release some of the shame by doing that. I think that can definitely help with self-compassion. The more you learn and understand what your brain is doing, I think the easier it is to have compassion for yourself as you go through it.
Mhm, mhm. Absolutely.
Definitely. Let's see if there's other questions that we want to address.
Oh, let me just say, love Lana, at age 18. I know you're talking about a lot of trauma that it seems happened after a suicide in your family, and I'm so so sorry. First of all, for that and for everything that you've navigated. And I know you say it happened 3 years ago, and asking about OCD putting too much value on those items. I just want to acknowledge the pain that comes with that. And for me, one of the really tough things with OCD was the loss of someone to suicide, but also this aspect of OCD and trauma and grief can get really really intertwined and can come together. And I would really encourage you to make sure that you're seeking treatment, and in addition to doing exposure work, that you're really kind of diving into some of that trauma work and figuring out, okay, where does this touch with the OCD? Maybe where does it not? Where does all of this stem from? But as you're going through that, I also just want you, while I don't have all the answers from what you shared here, I just want you to know that I'm so sorry for that. And I feel that way more than you could possibly know as someone who's OCD latched on to that with a loved one. And please know that as you navigate, that you are loved, and that you are valued, and also that you can get through that with the right support.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. I think it's important to acknowledge the way OCD and trauma can interact with each other, especially because we have this really kind of aggressive approach with ERP that isn't always helpful when there's that trauma piece. Sometimes we have to go a little slower so we don't re traumatize ourselves, right? And so that's why it's so important to be, like you said, seeking that proper treatment where they can be understanding of the trauma that you've gone through and work to maybe, hold back on certain areas in ERP and do the trauma work there first before you dive into the ERP, right? Kind of sometimes we have to play, I don't know, a little like tag a game where it's like we'll approach the trauma and now we'll do the ERP, right? But it's so important that when you have both of those elements that you're seeking proper treatment from a therapist who understands both. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing your story. Let's see. Okay, so one person said, um, at 6:31 or 8:31 your time, what do you actually do when you're sitting with the anxiety and waiting for it to pass, especially while falling asleep? We often say like, sit with the uncertainty, lean into the uncertainty, right? But what does that actually look like? It's something totally different, right? Yeah, do you have any thoughts, Katie, for what that looks like for you?
Yeah. Okay. Here, let me think about. Do you have anything that immediately comes to
Yeah,
mind?
Yeah,
Go for
I'll
it.
just say, I think that sometimes it's really easy to grab onto those thoughts, right? When we're, especially when we're falling asleep and we're starting to lose some of our ability to regulate our thoughts, right? As the sleep comes and takes over, it can be really easy to start kind of arguing with those thoughts and trying to figure them out. And it might feel like we're leaning into the uncertainty or leaning into the anxiety when we're really just
Mhm,
doing more compulsions of figuring out our thoughts. And so I say, when you're in those moments where you're trying to sit with the anxiety of the thoughts, rather than grabbing onto the thoughts or looking at those different things, try to just grab into the emotion that's there. So
mhm,
recognize, what emotion am I feeling? Is it anxiety? Is it a variation of anxiety? Is it fear? Is it, right? Just kind of, if you have, um, I love the dialectical behavioral therapy flower wheel charts that show all the emotions. If you're able to label the emotion and then notice where it sits in your body and then notice its intensity, I think that can help, because I'll notice, okay, I'm feeling anxious. It's like in my chest and it's an 8 out of 10. And then maybe 5 minutes later, I'll check in again and I'm still feeling anxious. It's, maybe a little somewhere a little different in my chest, and now it's a 6 out of 10. And it can just make it feel like more of an action, because a lot of the time the sitting with the anxiety is passive, right? And it can feel really counterintuitive when we're used to arguing with our thoughts or used to doing these really action intense things to try to figure it out. It feels really weird just to sit, right, and not figure it out. And so when I'm able to track, my distress or track what emotions I'm feeling, it makes it feel like a little bit less passive, which can make it a little easier to sit through.
I love everything you just said, and I'm so glad you brought up kind of the flower wheel in DBT too. I think that's, for anybody not familiar with that, that's so useful for so many reasons. My students get really sick of it. We have a checkout form they have to do every single day from class where they have to fill in where they are on. They call it the feelings wheel. So some of them are funny. I teach 17-year-olds, and they'll walk into class and they'll be like, Chaplain K, I am feeling mildly anxious on the feelings wheel. So we have that
I
whole
love that.
yeah. But I agree with everything that you just said. And I was sitting here thinking about it. And for me, what ends up happening is kind of trying to push away that anxiety while I'm sitting with it. I end up, especially when I'm going to sleep, it's like I wish I could go to sleep. I wish I could go to sleep. I'm sitting with the anxiety, but when is it going to be gone? And the more that I try to go to sleep, the more I try to get rid of the anxiety. Even if I don't think I'm trying to get rid of it, but the more I'm like, okay, I want that to be gone so I can go to sleep, the stronger and stronger it gets. So for me, I think it's a combination of one, allowing it to be there. And sometimes I'll even play a trick with my brain and say, wow, I'm so excited that I'm anxious before bed. What a great time for me to practice my skills and tools right now. And just really inviting it and bringing it on. But for me, it's also a really great opportunity to use some mindfulness tools just to come back to that present moment, as opposed to floating off with my anxiety. So before bed, either doing breathing exercises, or I love doing five senses and doing 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, five things you hear, and so on and so forth. But something to bring you back to that moment where you can let that anxiety be there, but you can still feel your bed and feel what's going on right in that moment with you.
I love that. I love what you said about not trying to push it away to sleep, because that's so easy to do when you're like, I just want to sleep. And so I've been instead being like, whenever I feel like, okay, I'm frustrated, I can't sleep, I'll be like, oh, that's okay, because I just wanted to rest anyway. Like
Mhm.
maybe yeah, that same thing where you're trying to trick your brain. I was like, maybe I didn't want to sleep. I'm just content resting. How comfy is my bed? How fun that even though I'm having, distress, at least I'm in a comfy position, right? And kind of the idea of expecting and accepting. Expect that sometimes your anxiety will worsen at night. Some of that's just because you're alone at night, your brain's winding down from the day. There's so many reasons that can happen at night, right? So expect
Mhm.
it, don't otherwise you beat yourself up every night when it happens. Expect that it might be harder at night, and then accept it when it is, just okay, this is the present moment. And then like you said, I love the idea of using mindfulness to bring you back to the comfy bed and the pillow under your head, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that's great.
I love that to expect it and accept it. I think that's just awesome. And that, I mean, it fits not just in going to sleep, it's everything that everybody's
Yeah.
asking on here. we have OCD, expect that it's going to come up, accept when it's there. And again, for me, if it continues to plague me, I try to flip it and say, wow, I am so glad I had that ridiculously intrusive thought. And what a great opportunity to practice my skills. And it's almost like you freak the OCD out when you do that. And it gets smaller very, very quickly.
I love that. Yeah, I think that's something I've had to employ a lot, even in recovery, right? Is still expecting that there's going to be little flare ups and there's going to be days that just, for whatever reason, it feels like the rug's ripped out from under me. And I'm just like, there you are, OCD. Like, hello, old friend. We're
Yep.
seeing you in all of your colors today, right? But I love that idea of just like, oh, so excited that you're here. Like, have a seat. This is what I'm doing currently. You're more than welcome to sit there and keep talking. I'm busy though, right? Yeah, that's great. Okay, let's see what other questions we've got.
Um, I see at 8:37. I'm curious what you think of this too, Tia. How we can get other people to view us as normal, and I would love to even reframe that and say, in addition to that, how might I we hear all sorts of things in the media and on social media about OCD that are not accurate about OCD. So how can we both help individuals to understand maybe the suffering that we're experiencing, but also to respect the journey that we're on and that we're still capable of living these beautiful lives.
Yeah, I think so much of that just comes back to the idea that everyone's experienced these emotions that we experience, right? And everyone's also experienced, most people have experienced intrusive thoughts. They did a study where they had a bunch of therapists have everyone write down their intrusive thoughts, and some of the group had OCD, some didn't. And then the therapist looked at all the written down intrusive thoughts and tried to guess who had OCD and who didn't. And they were the same. They had the same intrusive thoughts, right? The only difference is with OCD is the intensity and like maybe the frequency they're coming up, and then the power that is assigned to them, and then compulsions we do to get rid of them, right? And so I think that on the one hand, if using your reframe of the question, like how do we get people to better understand OCD, just talk about the emotions that's there, because that's something that most people have dealt with. Someone's bound to have experienced anxiety or bound to experience some sort of distress, right? Or those intrusive thoughts. And then I'd also say, if with the original question, how can we get people to view us as normal? I'd maybe encourage you to ask yourself, why do you feel that we need to be normal in order to have love or acceptance or friends, right? I think that normal can be boring. And so I think that there's maybe a better question is like, how can we give ourselves love even when we don't fit the mold, or even when we have brains that are less than normal, right? How can we still give ourselves love and still have those meaningful connections? And I think that so much of that comes back to those base emotions that every human experiences, whether you have OCD or not.
Oh, I love that you're asking even the normal piece. And I totally agree. I tell my students all the time, like it would be super, super boring if we were all exactly the same, or if we were all quote unquote normal, or whatever in the world that possibly means, which is not.
Right.
But it just recognizing that you do deserve compassion, that we're uniquely beautiful individuals. And yeah, OCD is something that we navigate, but there is so much more to us as well. I also love what you said about the intrusive thought piece. And I think that's so important to recognize that literally everybody has intrusive thoughts. Our brain just kind of spouts random thoughts throughout the day. And yes, we just place more emphasis on them. They tend to get stickier. And I always say that I'm actually more concerned about people who say they don't have any intrusive thoughts. That's a little weirder to me than anybody who does, because I'm pretty sure they're lying. I think we all have very similar thoughts. We just tend to give them way more value than folks without OCD.
Agreed. Yeah, I've started saying some of my intrusive thoughts as jokes out loud.
Mm.
So like I was at the duck pond the other day and I just was like, I really want to drop kick one of these ducks. I just keep having this image of me drop kicking one of these ducks, right? And my friend was like, I've been thinking the same thing, right? And so I think it can help to kind of dispel this idea that we have these hidden thoughts that how horrible would I want to kick a duck, right? And when you say it out loud, it sounds even sillier. Of course, I'm not interested in kicking a duck, right? But I
Mhm.
think it helped me realize, like, it was fun to hear my friend be like, I had that exact same thought. I also wanted to push this kid in the water, right? Like
Mhm.
everyone has these intrusive thoughts. And so when we're able to recognize them and dispel some of the shame from them, it's almost like a magician that you learn the magician's secrets and now his tricks are no longer that exciting.
Mhm.
That's kind of how I view my intrusive thoughts now. It's like, oh, that's cute, but there's no longer this magic of this, oh my goodness, like feel all these emotions. It's just like, oh, that's cute, right? Like I know this trick, I've heard it before. And so I think the more you can hear other people's intrusive thoughts, the more you get to know people in the community and recognize how normal a lot of these thoughts are, quote unquote normal. I think that can help a lot with the shame that you can experience when you have a mental health condition like OCD.
Mhm. And I love that you said your friend too, and I've had that too where I've shared I remember the first time I was so nervous sharing with one of my best friends, "Well, here's the intrusive thoughts I'm working on as a part of, my ERP," and she's like, "Oh, I get those too." She's like, "I just don't worry about them." I was like, "No, there's no way you get those, like, they're super creepy," and she's like, "No, no, I have those pretty much every day." I was like, "What?" So it's pretty amazing.
I love that. Yeah. Yeah, I think we sometimes give ourselves too much credit for them, right? When it's like,
Mhm,
maybe maybe it is more of a normal experience and something that doesn't have to have so much shame attached to it, right? Because OCD just loves the shame. It loves to feed on the shame, feed on the secrecy. So the more we can practice, even if it's not telling someone your intrusive thoughts, but just writing them down,
mhm.
or just anything you can do to normalize some of those thoughts you're experiencing, the less shame you feel, the easier it is, I think, to combat.
Mhm. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Okay, I'm trying to see if we had any
I
more.
know. It's hard to read through all the questions.
There's a lot. Y'all have great
There's so
questions.
many. Yeah, there's so many good ones. Okay, there's one at 6:30 or 8:30 for you where it says, "What can I do to help with the feeling of needing to return to a certain location to repeat something the correct way, even when there's no one there to hear me?" Yeah, that sounds a lot like just right OCD, where there's this feeling that OCD is taken away, this feeling of just right, and you feel that you have to engage with this compulsion until things feel correct or until things feel just right. And that will help the distress go away for just a second, but then it will often just come back worse the next time, right? Do you have any thoughts or experience with that, Katie?
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about maybe from my own experience, maybe not returning to a place to do the correct thing, but I used to return to places to check things all the time. And I remember, again, I'm a minister, and I remember actually I was in seminary and I was interning at churches, and I would literally drive back to churches at 2 o'clock in the morning to make sure that I had locked the door, to make sure that I had blown out the candles. And then I would turn around, drive home, and then drive back again over and over again. And for safety reasons, but also because it didn't feel right, because it didn't feel correct. And what ended up happening was every single time I did it, I told my brain, well, it's still not right. It's still not correct. And you can't trust yourself. You can't trust that it's right. And the biggest thing that I can possibly say is the only way to stop that cycle is to not return, is to say, you know what? It might not be right. It might not be correct. And I'm willing to sit with all of that anxiety. I'm willing to sit with all of that discomfort. And you know what? It really might not be correct. I might not have done it correctly, but I'm not going to return to that location because I value myself and I value my recovery more than I do that little gut feeling of certainty that it's going to give me for just 10 seconds.
Right. Yeah, and it's that teaching our brain that we can sit with that feeling of things not feeling correct and continue to sit with it, right? There's nothing we need to do to get it to go away. We just will sit with it and continue in that values consistent life that we want, which isn't, driving back to the church a bunch of times. I'm sure that wasn't necessarily values consistent or what you wanted to be doing with your time, right? But we can teach our brains over time of doing these exposures and not going back and engaging that we don't have to. Our emotions do pass, and we don't need to engage with them to get them to go away, right?
Well, and I'm wondering too for you, and I used to ask my therapist this all the time, as you sat with it, as you sit with the discomfort more and more, has it gotten easier for you to be able to sit with that discomfort?
I think definitely. Yeah, sometimes the discomfort in certain themes didn't feel like the discomfort itself went away, but I got way more equipped to tolerate it, right?
Mhm.
Like now I can sit through it. And even when it still is just as big as it used to be, I can now engage in other activities while I'm sitting with it, right? It does get easier the more you do it over time. And it's important to remember that when we've been doing this, this OCD way of thinking for so long, when we've been engaging with our compulsions for so long, and every time we feel the feeling of things not being right, we go into a compulsion, it's going to feel extra weird the first time you stop doing that, right? Our brains are not used to these big changes. And I often describe it like this big canyon that we've formed of our OCD, and we're over here making this little divot, and we're trying to reroute this water to this little divot, and it's going to feel so uncomfortable, and our brain's like, why are you using this little divot? You have this beautiful canyon that we've created. We know how to get rid of this emotion, right? And you're still going to reroute the water until eventually this is the canyon, and your brain is using this as the default, and you figure out that that you're okay, right? It's not so uncomfortable to sit with those emotions anymore. I definitely think that the more we practice, the more we can learn to tolerate. Even if the emotion itself doesn't go away or get any
Mhm.
better, we can just learn to be with it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think the more that I think I used to really struggle with this idea of, oh my goodness, I have to be willing to be anxious forever. How is that possible? But I think once we're willing to let that anxiety or that emotion, that uncomfortable feeling be there forever, it gets easier to sit with, and it's not as strong as those initial moments. And I know over time, for me, yeah, I'm willing to maybe be uncomfortable forever, but it's not the same discomfort that I had when I was first starting treatment. It's discomfort that pops up for 10 or 20 seconds. And then I'm like, oh, that's nice. I'm going to move on with my day. But it takes sitting with that in those initial really hard moments and knowing that you'll get to a point where, yes, it'll be there, but it'll be so much easier than it is in this moment.
I love that. I think that's great. Maybe we'll answer kind of one last question, and then we'll call it. But thank you everyone for being here. These are such good questions. It's hard to choose a last one. I'm seeing a lot about spirituality and religion. One person mentioned, I grew up in this particular faith tradition. My OCD really grabbed onto things. What's that about? And someone else was talking about whether OCD and spirituality, how can we engage with both. So I mean, I know you have probably so many thoughts, it's probably hard to talk for just a couple minutes about it, but yeah, do you want to talk a little bit to that?
Yeah, absolutely. This is like my biggest passion area. So I'll try to boil it down to 1 minute. So with OCD, y'all, it goes back into everything else that we're talking about. OCD literally latches onto the things that are the most important to you. And for so many individuals, the value that's the most important to them is faith. So it makes a lot of sense that OCD just loves to latch onto faith, whether you identify as Hindu or Christian or Buddhist or Muslim or Sikh, or whether you don't identify with a particular faith tradition, but spirituality might be important to you in some way. It can really latch on and make it difficult to determine, what do you believe? What's your relationship with God? What's your relationship with a higher power? What's your relationship with the world? And what's your OCD? And I just had a question from somebody earlier who reached out to me about this and was asking, well, how do I know what I actually believe, and how do I know what my OCD is telling me to believe? And I think that's what comes up the most often. And what I would really encourage folks to do as they're navigating is to go through the treatment, to engage in exposure and response prevention, and to trust that even the things that you're doing as a part of that treatment that might feel like they contradict your faith, even if you're being told maybe to not pray in the correct way, or to not wash that additional time before a Friday prayer, or to maybe pray incorrectly while fasting, whatever that is in your particular tradition, to know that it's not something to get further away from your faith or to take away from your faith. It's actually something that's helping you get back to your faith in a way that's meaningful and in a way that's value driven. So it is okay to trust the treatment through that process. And I think the most important thing to know as we're engaging with both faith and OCD is sometimes it can feel like they are mutually exclusive, and they're not. They are not at all. You can have faith, you can engage in a faith tradition, and also you can do these exposures that feel really hard and feel really scary. And they'll actually help you to get back to your faith in a way that's meaningful to you, and they'll help you engage in what you believe. I'll say again, I'm an ordained minister and an interfaith chaplain who's had all sorts of OCD themes around harm and false memories and lots of stuff. I'm super open about it. And having faith and having OCD don't have to be mutually exclusive. those things can come together as a part of your treatment.
That's beautiful. I love every bit of that. Yeah, my faith was what my OCD grabbed onto the most, the scrupulosity and this intense fear of doing things wrong or going to hell or displeasing God, right? And it felt like you just said, like sometimes it felt like I was going against my faith tradition in doing these exposures. It was, small things even like swearing, which was something that was super against my faith tradition, and that was something I was engaging in exposure therapy. And the way I like to describe it is it's like you said, it got me back to my faith in the sense that it gave me the power to choose. Before it felt like I didn't have the power to choose. I just didn't swear because I was so scared of swearing, right? And now it's like now I can choose whether I want to swear or not, right? And you can kind of choose how you engage with your faith. And I think that is, I mean, that's the point of faith, right? We're supposed to be engaging with our faith because we love it and because we have joy when we reach out to our higher power or engage with it. And unfortunately, it can be really different with OCD and feel very fear and shame driven. And so I love what you said about it being a chance to get back to that faith and, a chance to get back to our ability to choose that faith instead of simply being forced into it, I think.
Yeah, it should be about what you want, what you feel, your relationship with the higher power, and OCD, yeah, loves to get in there and take that away and say, you have to do this thing, you have to do it in this way, this is how you have to do it. And moving through the treatment, I really do promise, as scary as it seems, it'll help you get closer to your faith in a way that's meaningful and value driven to you. And Tia, I'm sorry that you navigated that, because scrupulosity, I know, can be super, super, super hard. But I also love that you were able to go through treatment, because a lot of folks in faith tradition, it can be a really tricky thing.
For sure.
Able to be at a place where it's meaningful to you in a way that is value driven.
Yeah, yeah, and that's the goal, right? Whether it's getting back to your faith tradition or just getting back to your friends and your community, right? The idea is to get back to your values, and ERP is the way to do it. And so we're so glad that all of you guys tuned in and kind of, got to hear a little bit of our stories and share some of yours in the comments. It was lovely to hear from you all. Hopefully, we'll see you guys again. I run, like I said, a couple of these different support groups here at NoCD, and you can also come find me on Instagram at Tortilla Wilson. And Katie, do you want to tell people where they can find you and what you're doing?
Yeah, I do lots of stuff related to faith and OCD that you can either find on my website or at my Instagram. Everything's linked through there. At Chapk runs 50 ultras for OCD. You can also follow my ridiculous journey to run 50 ultra marathons for individuals seeking treatment for an OCD. So feel free to reach out there if you're interested in that or the intersection between faith and mental health.
I love that. Okay, well, thank you all. We'll see you guys next time. Bye, everyone.